Hello and welcome to my kitchen. I'm Adriana. You may know me from Instagram as Sourdough. I don't show my face there a ton. This is me. And I'm so excited to welcome you into my home so that we can learn to make bread together. Honestly, it's so exciting. It's a little nerve-wracking as YouTube is a whole new world for me. But I think we're going to rise to the challenge and have some fun. Many of you are going to be here because of my 52 weeks of sourdough challenge, which is super casual. Really, it's just a motivational challenge where you can make bread with me if you want. You don't have to. It's fine. Every month, I'm going to have a bread theme, and I will come on YouTube and I'll share a recipe for that month's theme. Most weeks, I'm just going to be making my sourdough sandwich bread. That's the bread that we use most often in my home. And that is like the weekly bake, and then I'll make other things too every month. So first, we are starting with my very famous sourdough sandwich bread. Everybody loves this recipe, and for good reason. Honestly, it's like my pride and joy. I'm so proud of myself that I made this recipe, and it is so good. So it's pretty simple. I am going to be doing two different versions for my fresh milled friends, and then commercial flour for the rest of you. So I will be showing kind of a side-by-side. The process itself is pretty much the same, but I'll talk about the differences as I go. The recipe is on my website. I will try to link it if I can figure that out. Otherwise, it's at southwestsourdough.com under the recipes tab. So let's get started. Okay, I'm going to kind of bend down here for a second. So first order of business is weighing out all my grain so I can grind it, and then I'll also do all my flour. Alright, so this is all organic hard white wheat. This is my favorite for the sandwich bread recipe. And because of the machine that I'm making it in, I'm making 3 loaves. So I need 1,170 grams of grain. And the really great thing about weighing is that it's even across the board. As long as you're weighing, your grain is going to be the same as the flour. It's not going to change any in weight during the milling process. So you only have to weigh it out once. We're going to 1170. Ooh, right on the money. See? Okay, hard white wheat is very similar to hard red wheat, and they have a higher protein content, so they're better for bread. So this is going to give us a really nice and fluffy loaf of bread. And it's hard white is going to be what's the most similar to the commercial flour that we're all used to. So now I'm going to dump all the grain into the hopper, and it's already on, and it's set to the setting that I need it to be. It's going to get loud, and I will cut out the sound. So all of my flour is now ground. It's all ground. I'm going to weigh into my bowl 675 grams of milk. And I'm going to crack my egg. My daughter dropped this on the way inside from gathering it from the chickens like an hour ago. So have our egg, and then I'm going to do my sugar. I just grab a giant scoop from my jar, and then I just pour it in. And I use Redmond's real salt, so mineral salt. And it doesn't have any clumping agents, so sometimes it gets clumpy. You just have to break them up. They break up really easy. Alright, and we are doing fresh milled, so I'm grabbing my fresh milled leaven. So it looks like this. It's very happy. Let's see if I can get that to focus in. Okay, so super happy, active leaven. The bubbles are just starting to break through the surface, which looks pretty different, but it falls away from the side, so this is perfect. That ended up being 270 grams of leaven. My recipes are all formulated for 250 grams of leaven, but I was a little lazy last night and didn't take anything out, so I just had a little extra. That's fine with sandwich loaves because there's so much fat, it can slow down the fermentation process, so A little more leaven won't hurt. It'll actually just speed the process up a little bit, which is good. Okay, so now that that's all in there, I am going to just take my rubber spatula, kind of break up the yolk a little bit in the egg and just stir it around. You don't have to do this, but it just helps it incorporate a little bit faster, so I always do. And the recipe does call for butter, but we don't put it in until the very end. And I'm just going to add my flour a little bit at a time at first, and then I'll do one big dump at the end. Just helps it to incorporate better in this particular machine. If I were doing it in the Bosch, I would just dump all the flour in on top. I'm just going to let this mix until it's all fully incorporated, and then I will let it rest for a few minutes, and then I'll start kneading it. Fully combined, I'm going to scrape down the sides of the bowl, and then I'll run it for just a few more minutes. The dough can seem a little bit dry at this point, especially if you're using fresh milled wheat. It's okay, we're going to add the butter in later, and it will give it all the hydration it needs, so it's going to be a little bit thick. And fresh milled flour takes a little bit longer for it to fully absorb and for the gluten to build structure. So it's okay. It's all part of the process. Don't worry about it and just keep going. All right. So I decided to pull the Bosch out. I already have most of my ingredients in. I'm just going to dump in my leaven. This one is the commercial flour. So this is, I'm just going to do all the commercial flour bread in the Bosch. And normally this would be like up here, but it was a really cold day and I hadn't fed my starter for a few days. So because of the holidays, it's just a little bit sluggish, and it's fine. It's totally going to leaven the bread just fine. This recipe is super forgiving. So it's just going to... With this, kind of like I do in the other mixer, you just want to break it up a little bit. It's just easier to get it to mix in if we do that. Now the Bosch is really loud, but the key to making this recipe in the Bosch is to put all your ingredients in cold. So sometimes I'll warm up my milk if I'm in a hurry with the incarcerum, because sometimes that can help. It doesn't heat up your dough as much, but the Bosch heats it up a lot. So sometimes you'll struggle with overheating your dough and it won't reach window pane because it's simply too hot. The key is to use cold milk. Cold milk always in the Bosch. All right, so I'll show you what this looks like. I always kind of tap the sides to get all the flour that sits underneath the lid. Just pull you up here. So that's what we're looking like. It's not sticky. It is cold, so that's good for the Bosch. We want it to be cool so that it doesn't overheat. So now I'm just going to knead it for a little, actually, yeah, I'm going to get all this extra flour. I'm going to let it mix a little longer, and then we'll let it sit. And I'll get to work on this one. So I'm going to turn this on now. It's been sitting for a little while, but definitely is still a little dry in spots and needs a little bit more work. All right, so it has been kneading for a few minutes, not very long. The dough is still, this is the fresh milled dough. It's still not really stretchy. It tore. But there is some elasticity in there, but we really want it to be more stretchy before we start to add our butter. So I'm going to throw that back in there, and we're going to let it knead a little bit longer. I have the incarcerum, I turned it off for a second so I could talk, but I have the incarcerum kneading the fresh milled sandwich dough, and then this has been sitting for just a few minutes after throwing it together, and so now this is going to start kneading as well. So I'll show you the difference. This one is already going to be pretty stretchy. So it's still cold. Like there's not even any heat being produced yet. And yet I can technically see light through the dough. So commercial flour is so different from fresh milled flour. So this is already stretchy. It's definitely stickier, like a lot stickier. But still cold, which is good if you're using a Bosch running this. Let's talk about using a KitchenAid for a minute. I do not suggest using KitchenAids for bread. They burn out so fast. The KitchenAid manual, I believe, says that you're only supposed to knead for like 3 minutes tops. That's just not really feasible with making bread in a stand mixer. So here's what I would suggest doing if all you have is a KitchenAid. You can do this whole recipe by hand. It just takes a little bit more elbow grease, but you can still totally do it. So if you're doing a KitchenAid though, mix all your ingredients together just like the initial mix. Just get the flour absorbed and then pull it out, let it rest for a while, and then start kneading. And if you're going to be doing it by hand, I would just put the butter in melted at the beginning. You'll have to knead a little bit longer, but it's not quite as messy and frustrating to knead by hand if you're putting the butter in first. So that's my take on KitchenAids. I would almost rather do it by hand than do it all in a KitchenAid, because you're just way more likely to completely burn out your KitchenAid. I do love my Bosch. It's very similar in price to the KitchenAid. You can do cookie dough and everything in it. It's a workhorse. This thing, like my mother-in-law has one that her mom gave her. They last forever. You would probably never have to buy a second one ever. The Incarcerum, I was gifted that. I don't know how long they last. I love it so far. It is a really amazing machine, but I don't know how long it lasts. And it is significantly more expensive than the Bosch itself. The Incarcerum just has the like really nice luxury benefits, but this is a great machine as well. That's my take. You can totally do all of this by hand too. No need to have a stand mixer at all. It just makes it nice because you don't have to do quite so much work. So I'm going to get these kneading, and that's my take on KitchenAids. On this one is definitely more of a dough already. So this is a commercial flour. Yep, we have reached window pane, which means I can stretch it thin enough to see light through it. So terrible lighting, but you can see the light through it without it tearing too bad. See, I popped a hole with my nail, but that's all we really need before we start putting in our butter. So the sandwich loaf with the commercial flour is all ready to start adding the butter. It's still a little bit easy to tear, but you can see light through it, so this is the perfect time to start adding the butter, especially because the Bosch can heat up so quickly. I have my butter, and I'm just going to basically cut it into like tablespoon-sized pats and just dump them in one at a time. Give it like a minute to mix between pats so that it can get nicely incorporated. There will come a time while you're mixing this where it feels like it's never going to incorporate. It gets pretty messy and greasy. But I promise if you give it enough time, it will incorporate. So I'm going to turn it on. It's going to get loud, and I'm just going to incorporate all the butter pieces. Okay, so I mixed in all the butter. It's not all fully incorporated, but the dough's really, really warm. And so it's getting a little bit like easier to tear, so it's actually losing strength. So I'm just going to let it rest. I leave the lid on, but it needs some airflow, so I just kind of like stick that lid on there over the top just to give it a little bit of airflow, but not to let it dry out. And then I'm just going to set this aside, and I'm going to check the whole grain dough. This is just so much more dense in here. Okay, and it still is tearing a lot.
I hate them.
You hate them?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, just stick them on the counter. It's still tearing significantly. I'm going to knead it a little longer, and then we'll let it rest again. The whole grain bread has been kneading for a little bit longer. And to be honest, I'm just getting really impatient. So I'm just going to start adding the butter, and it'll work itself out. It'll be fine. And then the commercial dough has been sitting. It's cooling down a little bit. As you can see, as it sits, it gets stronger. So if you're using a Bosch, when in doubt, rest it out. Came up with that on the fly. Pretty proud of that one. So I'm just going to start adding all my butter into the fresh milled flour loaf and batter. Dough. Words. My goodness. Okay, so I'm adding butter into the fresh milled dough, and it'll work itself out. put all the butter into the fresh milled dough and into the commercial flour dough. So the commercial flour, if I can get it off, let's see. Okay, is completely ready to move on to the next stage. I'm going to let this one sit for just a little longer because with fresh milled, time is king. This is the most beautiful dough. It is just like soft and supple and stretchy. It's beautiful anyway. So I like to do a few slap and folds just to work the dough. I especially prefer to do this when I'm doing large amounts of dough instead of traditional kneading, but you can do traditional kneading if you would like instead of this. This also just helps bring it into a more cohesive ball, and then I bring it together. I mean, it's just the prettiest dough. Alright, so that goes in there. And cover it, and I reuse these so many times. They are well worth it. Okay, so then I'm going to go set this aside. I'm going to come back to my fresh milled. Fresh milled dough looks like. Now, it is not as strong or cohesive as the commercial flour. You'll notice a massive difference in texture. This one has not quite reached window pane, but it will with time, so I'm not worried about it. So I'm just going to knead it a little bit, and then we'll get it in a bowl. And I am going to do traditional kneading for this one because it's not as stretchy as the commercial flour. And then I'm just going to form it into a bit of a ball. And it is not as smooth as the commercial flour, but it's fine. It is going to make bread just the same, and it's going to be delicious. And this one will not rise quite as big as the commercially milled flour. Dough will, so I'm doing it in a smaller bowl. Alright, so now that the bread dough is all covered and put to the side, it is now time to let it rise. So it's going to rise anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. Could be more, could be less, depending on how cold your environment is. The fresh milled one will rise a little faster than the commercially yeasted one. It's winter here. It's Arizona, so it's still like hot for a lot of you. But my kitchen does get cold because I don't like to turn my heater on unless I absolutely have to. So this is the coolest solution that I found for temperature control. So there's a lot of different options for like starter temperature maintenance, but they're all really little and they only will hold like 1 jar of starter. There's this big bread proofer. It's like this big box, but it's very expensive. I think it's almost $300. This is under $100. Comes in lots of different sizes, and it is a complete game changer, glorious in the kitchen. It is a dough mat, and essentially it will heat from like 65 degrees to 120. The baby's awake, so if you hear baby babble, that's just him. So it'll go up to 120 degrees for sourdough. I would not encourage you to go up that high. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if you have it lower than 7 degrees body temperature, you're not going to feel the warmth of it. So don't be panicked if you don't feel like it's warm. It's still doing something. I cannot rave about this thing enough. This is a dish mat that I use to insulate the bottom of it. But I love this thing. Because I'm behind, I'm going to put it on here and hopefully we can kind of speed up the process a little. So I'm going to set it a little higher than I like to normally. Normally I like to keep it about 75. I'm going to probably bump it up to 80, 82, maybe 85. But I would never go over 90 because that can damage the culture. If it's over 90 naturally in your house, throw some ice cubes in your water when you feed. I'm going to set it to 82 and put both my bowls of dough on it, and we'll get going on the rising. Okay, so now I just have to go do a whole bunch of dishes, and I will come back when the bread has doubled in size. Well, it's now nighttime, and my kids are all in bed. We did a New Year's Eve countdown. It is, I think, 9:30 right now. So my bread is very well ready to be shaped. This is the fresh milled one that I just showed you, and then the commercial flour one, it actually could go a little higher. So I'm going to do this 1 second. Can't decide what I'm going to do. I'll decide by the time I'm done shaping. But it's like a little bit late to be able to get it in tonight unless I want to stay up until after midnight, which I don't think I really want to do. Or I can just put it in the fridge, but it'll be like slightly more sour. But I'm leaning towards doing that and just doing some of it tomorrow, and it'll be fine. So it's probably what I'll do, but I haven't decided yet. This is the best part of making sandwich bread. You don't do this with artisan dough, but you do it with sandwich bread. The punch. There's nothing quite as satisfying as punching down puffy dough. Alrighty. And then I'm just going to pull it all out. And one of the keys to knowing if you have well-fermented dough is if the bowl comes clean. So, like, I could honestly just, like, go rinse this out. There's hardly anything in there at all. So, for loaf, there's always a $1 I'm going to break it up. I'm going to just weigh it on the scale, 774. I'm very close. One day I don't get enough. I got 70, I'm just close enough. So I have 3 pretty much even dough balls. And, okay, so I'm going to do 1 sandwich loaf. Now, this dough isn't super duper stretchy, and it tears pretty easily because of all the bran that's in there. This isn't sifted at all, so it's not super duper stretchy or strong. It will tear. That's okay. That's normal. All right, so now I have like a rough rectangle situation here, and I'm just going to pull down from here and roll it nice and tight. And then I just tuck the ends under. Kind of squeeze it together. I have one of my pans. This particular pan sticks really bad. I don't love to just like grease up my pan. I just don't like it. So I just line it with parchment paper. This is a USA pan. This is my favorite bakeware company. And for the one that sticks, I just put parchment paper over the top of it. And then I just grab my little log. And it just sits right on in there. It will fill out quite a lot of the way. And then I just cover it with my shower cap. Kind of just on a rough shape. That's easy because I sort of this. And I'm just going to roll it and tucking and pulling as I roll so that it's a lot of tension on the surface. And then I'm just going to seal this up. Same wood, whether you love it smaller, it's just easier to do it in hands. Okay, make sure it's nice and tight. I love this pan. This is they're mini loaf pans, but they're what's called strapped, and so they're all connected, so it makes it so easy to get it in and out of the oven. So I'm just going to tuck that one in there. You always want to do it seam side down, that way it opens up beautifully instead of like bursting open because of the seam. So I'm going to take my other half here, flatten it out a bit, and then same thing, we're just tucking and rolling, pinching the ends off, and then this one is going in the pan as well. Okay, I'm just going to set that one aside, shape this one into another loaf. Just pull it down. I like to use your hands to show you essentially what you're doing. How much away from you as you pull it. So pull and push it down. And then just tucking those ends. And again, actually. So this is the same company, but this is called a Pullman loaf. So the sides are more straight up and down. I love this pan. I just love the shape that it provides. Now this pan is a little bit longer. So I'm going to kind of just roll the loaf out so that it fits better in the pan. Okay. And then seam side down. Just tuck that in there. Punch that down. Some nice bubbles coming out of there. It's my favorite. So you can hear all the bubbles pop. Okay. So with this, I'm getting 2 loaves and 2 mini loaves. So I need to weigh this out. Alright, so I am just going to break this up into 3 even chunks. I weighed it out once and then just divided by 3. That is way too much. I'm looking for roughly 770 grams. Okay, there we go. So that's 1 chunk. I'm just going to kind of work it so that all of those little pieces kind of get worked in. Okay. Let's set that off to the side. Let's see how big this chunk is. Oh, 769. So close. One of these days, I'm going to get it right every time. Are you kidding? 771. 770. Same thing, just kind of working it so that you can get just a nice little ball out of it. Just for fun. Okay. So I'm going to take that first one, which is going to be the most relaxed. I'm just going to kind of spread it apart a bit. Now this dough is a little bit stickier, but also stronger. Like, it's not going to tear at all. It's just this beautiful supple dough. You can stick it to the counter, and that's all the tension you need. I don't use any flour in shaping. There's no need to, as long as your dough is strong enough. Alright, so for this, I'm going to take these 2 corners together, and then that middle one comes down, and then I'm just tucking my thumbs and rolling it back. And then same thing, we're just going to tuck those ends in. We have a nice little loaf. So I'm going to, this one doesn't stick, so I don't need to stick any parchment paper into it. And it just goes down, seam side down. Now on to the next one. So that's what we're looking at here. And I'm going to cover this one with just a damp towel because I don't have a shower cap that'll cover that. All my loaves are now shaped, and I did decide I'm just going to stick them all in the fridge. I don't want to deal with it tonight. I have to clean the whole kitchen, the whole thing. So I'm just going to cover them up, stick them in the fridge, and then in the morning I'll pull them out so they can rise before I need to bake them once. So, all right, I will see you guys in the morning. All right, well, it is almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon, evening. My day did not go to plan. The baby was awake from midnight to 5 o'clock in the morning. So my husband let me sleep. It's very sweet of him, but my day was not very productive because I slept most of the day. So I pulled the loaves out of the fridge around noon, and they have been proving on my dough mat since then. It was a slow start because they were so cold from being in the fridge. So these are the whole grain loaves. They did not rise a ton, which is to be expected for the most part. They are ready a little bit sooner than the commercial flour ones, so I am going to get them baked along with the mini loaves, which I have right here. And I let these ones, these are just proofing, they weren't baking. So that oven is sitting at about 80 degrees. These ones, the commercial flour ones, could maybe go a little bit longer. But the way that you test is if you poke it and the indent stays and doesn't pop right back up, it's ready to bake. So my big oven is sitting at 375, and I'm going to pop all 3 of these into the oven. Before I throw them in the oven, though, you can score them, but you don't have to. So I'm going to score the commercial flour ones, but the whole wheat ones don't expand a ton, and so they don't really need to be scored at all. I love this bread loaf from Barlow & Co. I will try to link it for you. And the sandwich loaves, I'm just going to do just one little line down the middle. Nothing fancy today. And I'll throw these in the oven. The bread flour loaves are now ready. So the indent is mostly staying. I'm a little impatient. It'll be fine. But I gotta start on dinner, which means I need to clean off my counter. So I'm putting these in the oven. That's what we're working with. I'm not going to score them. There's no reason to, unless you want it to look a certain way. And these are just going to get eaten. So I'm going to stick these in my countertop oven and let them bake. I do drop this oven down lower because it's so much smaller, so it'll bake things faster. So I set this one to 350 instead of 375 like I set my big oven. The size difference between the whole grain and the bread flour is quite hilarious. I'm pulling the mini ones out, and then one of the most important aspects of making bread, especially with this recipe because ovens can vary so vastly, is to temp the loaves. So I am looking for it to be about 200 degrees. As long as it hits 190, we're good. Add just some softened butter. There's probably a fancier way to do this, but it works just fine for me. All of the bread is now out and cooling down. It has all been brushed with butter. The fresh milled loaves absorb the butter really, really quickly. Sorry for my kids. So they don't stay shiny like the commercial flour does. It's fine. It all tastes delicious. So this is some of the fresh milled bread. You have to eat hot bread. But if you wait until it's cool, the texture and crumb will be better. Alright, so I'm just going to put some butter on this. My kids are eating sandwiches for dinner. And I'm not going to eat on camera because I'm not cute at that. But it is delicious, and I'm going to eat this and go eat with my family. And this bread will store really well in the freezer. I just wait until it's fully cooled, and then you put it in the freezer. Or I keep mine in a cake plate. We usually polish it off very quickly. And that's my cue. Happy baking, everybody.